Welcome to the Jewish Drinking Show. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan. I'm excited to have first-time guest on, Rabbi David Polsky. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Jewish Drinking the show. I'm super stoked. Today, we've got on Rabbi David Polsky, who's joining us. And
I am.
L'chaim, thank you so much, Rabbi Polsky, for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having me, Rabbi Drew.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Rabbi Polsky, for those out there who don't know you yet, can you just share a little bit about your bio, who you are?
Lots of things on my bio, but I'm a Jewish educator and community rabbi living in the Metro Detroit area with my beautiful wife and two beautiful girls.
Awesome. All right, another Midwesterner. Not native though,
right?
Well,
not originally from. Sorry, I should have added. I'm originally from New York, but my wife's family is lives around here, so that's what brought us here.
Awesome. Midwest transplant. Awesome.
Yes.
And I know I'm not drinking tonight, but you are. So what do you have?
Yes. A Barkan Cabernet, 2018.
Ooh, awesome. How is it?
Good.
Awesome. All right, cool. So today we are discussing some good old like rabbinic texts from rabbinic literature about judging and praying. And so to kick us off, we're going to start off, I think this is a really interesting story with Rabban Gamliel. So for those who don't know, Rabban Gamliel's got a lot of interesting stories about him, especially in Mishnah and Brachot, but he's an interesting guy. There's this really cool story of Rabban Gamliel back the end of the first century, and there's a rabbinic text. It appears in Tosefta, it appears in the Bavli, it appears in Yerushalmi, that he's going on his way. He's going from Akko to Kaziv, and different things happen that day. But one of them is someone comes to him and asks him to, release them from their vows. So he says, you know what? Wait a second. To him and his fellow traveler, haven't we had a ravit of Italian wine? And he said, yeah. So you know what? We should probably wait until our wine gets out of our head. So one of the interesting things that the sages say in that text that they learned is that once you have this ravit, which is like a quarter of a log, right? It's a quarter of a log. Once you have that amount, which is roughly 3 to 5 ounces, right?
Something
Give or
like
take.
that.
It's in that ballpark.
Yes.
Okay. It's in that wine glass, 3 to 5 ounces.
Yes.
So now it's funny because that text, it was very specifically, it's Italian wine, but for the most part, the rabbis just said for the future, once you have this 3 to 5 ounces of wine, you shouldn't be doing any halakhic Torah-related guidance, right?
Any guidance? Well, I mean, we do have a discussion about what the exact parameters of that are.
Right, in a different text. So this is like the etiological. This is like the origin story for how this came to be.
Yes. But
as you point out, there is another text which, it makes things a little bit more interesting, a little bit more dynamic, as you point out.
Yes.
So the sages also take this notion coming from the 10th chapter in Sefer Vayikra in the book of Leviticus that Kohanim, when they're serving, should drink neither wine nor anything that intoxicates them. And they basically ultimately say the sages say, you know what, the minimum amount is a ravit. Once you have that, you're out, you can't do it. And but they say, but then that's when it gets interesting. Okay, we don't have the temple standing, what can we do? Well, actually, we do have something that's it's religious, it's a national service sort of activity. So how can we basically compare it, contrast it to giving halakhic guidance, right?
On Croesus 13b, so it talks about what exactly is supposed what are the types of things that you can't do when you're drunk. And as Rabbi Drew, as you mentioned, the pasuk talks about, says a number of different things. For example, "V'lahavdil bein hakodesh ubein hachol," and "Bein hatamei v'hatahor v'hatamei," and the Gemara in Croesus has a number of derivations on that pasuk. And so it says, "Tan Rabbanu lahavdil bein hakodesh ubein hachol." So meaning the sense of distinguishing between holy and profane. So ilu adamin varachin, deciding like how much like certain money offers were to the temple, and charamim, vekdeshos, and other types of dedications to the temple. And then it says bein hatamei uvein hatahor, between what's impure and pure. So this is also something that a person that you can't make any rabbinical decisions on. So that's tmeos utaharos, and that like in other words, they can't make any decisions on, I don't know, back in those days, it was like a dead mouse touched this, or is though there are going to be some exceptions to that as well, as we'll discuss. But that's also something that can't really make any complicated decisions on. And then finally, it says ulahoros, zuhora. In other words, that the fact that the Torah says ulahoros, probably in the original context, and then something like to teach or something like that, but in the Gemara, it's being read as zuhora, like actually making rabbinical decisions. And then eskol hachukim, and it also goes on all these like literally all these statutes. So the Brisa teaches elu midrashos. So these are legends, and then but if that's the case, if they're just like midrashim, so then like what's wrong with that? And so the commentators explain, no, that's those are the drashos that the rabbis would say at certain times of the year where they would decide halacha. And then asher diber Hashem, zu halacha. Okay, that's also deciding halacha. And then biyad Moshe zet Talmud, that is also, I guess, like discussing and analyzing things. And then it says yachol af Mishnah. But what about learning Mishnah? I would have thought that any sort of learning is forbidden. And then Talmud lomar ula horos, to analyze, to make actual decisions, and to just state things which, at least on the surface, are relatively clear without doing any sort of analysis. That is so that's not included. So it seems to be a function of judgment, where there's I mean, and it seems as if it's not just a function of learning, because I think there or elsewhere we had some material about like actually being even allowed to teach, but there's something about drinking that, I mean, as we all know, that affects our decision making, and the fact, and it seems as if like halacha is so. I mean, it's not just like, hey, there's this. It says in this text, it's like pretty straightforward. It's not really an objective process. Deciding these things is like, how do I look at this situation, and that requires. It's something that's very, very personal, and also requires a lot of personal sense of judgment, and which is incongruous with drinking wine. Don't worry, for any viewers, don't worry. There's no psak going on here, just in case you're concerned.
And then it does continue, right? You have a disagreement.
Yes.
Rabbi Yehuda.
And Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda Omer Yachol af Talmud. So I would have thought maybe even it comes to include any sort of learning. And then Talmud Lomar, but therefore the pasuk teaches ulahoros. It's really more, again, I guess you could discuss whether or not in the original context of the pasuk, I guess that whether the pshat would be really to teach, but in the rabbinic context, ulahoros means to decide halacha. And so we seem to have some level of debate whether or not this is only a function of studying, or is it making actual rabbinical decisions? And so that seems to be a little implicit here as well.
Yeah, and also if I can just bring in a parallel text, very similar to this in the Tosefta of Krito, they say after going through the invalidity of the avoda, they say kachim hayachacham. So similarly, if someone was a sage or talmid chacham, or the student of a sage, asur lalami lahoro, that it's forbidden once you're drinking to teach and to guide. But once again, Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda comes in again with his opinion and saying, Omer, that if he was a sage, then it's okay to teach. But it's funny because there he doesn't say to lahoro.
You mean that it's
that's in Tosefta Krito in the first chapter.
So it's really a function of teaching, meaning that there's a difference between teaching and deciding halacha. That deciding halacha requires, I mean, there's major significant consequences, and that's why it requires a better sense of judgment, but more so than if I analyze something wrong, and so it does. So you could argue that it doesn't require as much of an inherent sense of judgment as deciding halacha.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we do see that something earlier we saw in that Tosefta. It says, like, if something was really, really simple, that's just like straight out of the Mishnah, then that would be different. Like something that absolutely every single person knows, that is the halacha. So then that's not subject to this prohibition on deciding halacha when drunk.
Yeah, but in either way, it's Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yehuda who has a little bit more of a forgiving. Like, okay, it's, he said, don't let wine. It's okay that if you are of a certain stature, that it's possible for you to still teach or to do the Talmud piece and not just the Mishnah.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so basically from these early rabbinic texts, there's this idea not to do, although there's a little bit of a qualification in the Bavli, right? In Krito, in Krisos.
In Krito, yeah.
It's very straightforward.
Yeah, it doesn't.
And even someone who's had some wine can make that decision.
Yeah, because this aspect of deciding halacha, it's how do I analyze the situation? How do I put different sources together with each other? What are the consequences? I mean, we see with the COVID-19 about that many poskim are taking into consideration. Okay, like what are the consequences of my psak? Like what could happen if I decide if I make this decision or that decision? And so all those dimensions of psak. Not just like putting all these how do you reconcile like one source with the other, but how do I look at this situation? What are the consequences? So that requires a lot of judgment, which is really part of this sense of the halakhic determination process, which is incongruous with drinking wine. That's specifically Rabbi Yossi ben Rabbi Yehuda, the low Rabbanan, and not the rabbis who disagree with him. Then the Gemara in response says, "Afilu tema Rabbanan." No, even the rabbis would agree with this halacha that if it's really obvious that someone who drank some wine is okay to make that decision. It's something that like any school kid knows the answer to.
I hope you've been enjoying the show so far. I wanted to give you a sneak peek into next week's episode featuring Professor Mika Ahuvia.
They're putting the asparagus in boiled wine. So I actually I think this is the first time I'm seeing people talking about drinking boiled wine, which this would be like kind of important for your podcast.
I hope you enjoy that sneak peek, and now back to the show.
Judging under the influence.
Judging under the influence? Judging requires, judging halacha requires a great deal of judgment. All those things require really, really clear head, and to be halacha specifically is something about like making these types of distinctions between, but also looking at a lot of gray areas. We see that if something is specifically so obvious, so then that's not subject to this issue.
But it's not the same for prayer. Right? There's a little bit more room for fudging, or at least consumption of wine.
Yes.
Than there is with halakhic making halakhic rulings, right?
Yes.
So because once we hit for judging, it's got to be you have that 3 to 5 ounces and you're out of the game. But prayer, it's a little bit gray. It's definitely grayer. So not 1,000 times grayer, just it's a little bit more nuanced. So there's one text that I find really fascinating, early rabbinic text. It's a Braita. It's found on Eruvin, where it talks about, I mean, we could go through the whole thing, but basically it says that someone who's drunk is exempt from prayer, that they do not have to pray. And it's actually, and Rabbi Polsky pointed out a little bit later on the page, there's even a further level of drunkenness, the drunkenness of lot, but one doesn't even need to get that far just to see that someone who is drunk is exempt, which we see elsewhere in rabbinic literature, in the Mishnah, where it talks, there's an entire chapter having a bunch of people that it lists as also exempt from prayer, presumably because they're just not, they're not in the mindset, they don't have, they're not able to really, to be fully, present for prayer. And that seems to be the issue also with a drunk person, that they're not fully able to be present and fully aware. But what if you didn't make it all the way to being drunk? And also, just because someone's exempt from something, as we see in lots of things, doesn't mean they can't do, doesn't mean that they won't do it, right?
Yeah.
So, which gets us into a little bit of a later rabbinic, for those, it's Amoraic, so a little bit of later in rabbinic literature and Amoraic, there starts to be a little bit of a differentiation between drunk and getting a little buzz. We have, it's funny because it appears both in the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, but I'm just going to read out from the Bavli, which is Rabba Bar Rav Huna says, Shatui al yitpalel, someone who's had a little bit to drink, should not pray. But if he prays, hey, it counts. It's a good prayer. There's nothing wrong with it. He's good, right? He had a drink or two, nothing bad. But shikor, once someone gets drunk, their prayer it's an abomination. It's just like, you shouldn't have prayed in the first place. That's one thing, but you've gone too far. And I find this language fascinating because in the Yerushalmi, it's got a similar language, which is gidufin, which is also like, it's a similar abominable language. It's like, it's fascinating because I think it really, if someone sees someone davening, they're praying, and they are just smashed, it really isn't, it's not good. It doesn't, I don't know how much someone said from their own experience, or like they saw and it just really wasn't a good look. And they said, you know what, that's bad, right?
Oh, yeah.
The Babylonian Talmud's version, it says, so basically what's the difference? And they said, well, the one who's had a little bit to drink, they're still able to speak before the king. But the shikor, one who's like, they are drunk, they're unable to speak before the king. So that's the difference. Now, it's fascinating because in the Yerushalmi, in the Yerushalmi version, they ask what the difference is. It's less subjective, right? They objectify it. They say the one who's had something to drink is as long as they've had a ravit. We're going back to this 3 to 5 ounce idea, this ravit. So that's the minimum of what you really shouldn't be praying, but it's okay. But the drunk person is the drunk one is someone who's had more than this ravit, has had more than this 3 to 5 ounces.
Oh, wait, you're talking about in the Yerushalmi now?
Yeah, in the Yerushalmi.
Oh, because in the Yerushalmi, I see Ezehu Shasoi, Kol Shasa Revius, Shikor Shasa Yoser. In other words, that's the first explanation. Then Taman, in other words, there's one explanation of like the person who is considered like to have drunk some wine is like someone who just had a revius, but someone who's intoxicated, someone who drank more than this revius. But then it gives another explanation about Taman Amre, like over there elsewhere, it says, they said, Kol she'enu yachol ledaber lifnei hamelch, someone who
in Bavel. Taman is in Bavel.
Ah, okay.
So they're saying Taman Amre, that's what they say over in Babylonian, which we see in the Babylonian Talmud.
Yeah.
That is their measurement of someone who's unable to speak before the king. But I mean, that's a really fascinating difference between the Bavli, which is subjective to the person, and the Yerushalmi, which is objective to this Ravit.
So I don't know if I didn't get a chance to mention this to you before, but I think that this this year, whether in the Bav of the Revius, whether in the Bavli or the Shalmi, is suggesting that. I think it's sort of connecting to the avoda. I think, did we discuss this in once we started recording, that a Kohen who has drunk wine, and performs the avoda, the temple ritual, is at least theoretically worthy of the death penalty. In fact, that pasuk, that verse I was quoting before, that the Gemara in Krisis was analyzing. I mean, the original context of that was actually in Hashem's command to Aharon after the death of Nadab and Abihu. Possibly they were drunk, and then Hashem gives Aharon this command of you can't drink wine, etc. And all these other things about the sign halacha that seems to be along for the ride. But I think, if I remember correctly, the shear of drinking wine that would make the Kohen liable is a revius, is drinking that amount, even if he wouldn't be intoxicated. And I think that that would suggest something to this idea about prayer as a voda shebelev, that the service of the heart, that just like, let's say, a Kohen shouldn't be performing the avoda, the temple rituals, even if he's only drunk a revius of wine. So similarly, someone shouldn't be praying if they'd had a revius, just in parallel to the Kohen. If the Kohen isn't allowed to have a revius of wine, so the avoda shebelev, this worship of the heart, this temple service within the heart, also has this potential shear of a revius. But then the Bavli's explanation about kol she'enu yachol ledaber lifnei hamelech seems to have, well, I wouldn't say a contradistinction, but it has a different shear with regard to and basic requirement of prayer, and that is ledaber lifnei hamelech, that if I were to speak in front of, let's say, a king, or let's say, well, actually, I think I had enough to drink that I could say a president I respected. So if I was in front of a president that I respected, I want to have full mental capacity. I want to take that occasion very, very seriously. One of the basic requirements of prayer, at least theoretically, we're supposed to be imagining ourselves and as if we're standing in front of Hashem. And if we're standing in front of Hashem, so then also, I mean, we want to have our minds clear. And so I think it has to do with the sense of basic values. If I'm drunk enough that I would not want to be standing in front of a king, then I shouldn't be praying if I've had that amount to drink. And that's why I personally think that this idea about prayer, that if that person drunk so much that their prayer is blasphemy, it's heresy, I think it has to do with the fact that if they are so not clear-minded that they would not be speaking in front of a king. So that being the case, so clearly they are not assuming that they don't have the mentality that they are actually standing in front of Hashem, because if they were to be taking that seriously, they wouldn't be praying, or either that, or even a worst case scenario, they're treating standing in front of Hashem as lower than standing in front of a king, which itself is very, very blasphemous.
I think it's not just about a clear mind, although to some degree there should be that, and certainly to be able to and to have kavanah halev, to be able to mentally direct their prayers, but also I think it's about the clearness of speech. Like if they're slurring their words, and I mean, it happens to people. You get drunk and your words start going every which way, and you know. I think that's kind of what's going on here for the Bavli, of saying, like, if you're not able to get your words in line and really know what you're saying. It's interesting in thinking about sort of the afterlife of these rabbinic texts.
Oh, yes.
That we don't have. I don't know about the judging pieces, although I should look into that for my own purposes. But for the prayer pieces, the prayer exemption that we saw in the Talmud doesn't, as far as I know, it's not mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't really have much of a reception later on. But the Babylonian Talmud's distinction between the Shatui and the Shikor, the one who's had a little bit, versus the drunk, that gets recorded in Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch and a bunch of other places. That seems to be the standard.
Yeah, though I think I remember seeing. I unfortunately didn't have enough time to look at this in depth, but it's also this sense of it's taken for granted nowadays that we don't really have such a great deal of kavana, that we don't really have this sense of concentration.
Could you? I would say it's a widespread notion.
Oh yeah.
Can I push back a bit against that? Like, I think it's possible. You read the words and like, I know that our minds could go in a million different directions.
Okay.
We have so many things going on in our lives, but I wouldn't say it's just like, no one can do it. I would say like, there's a widespread notion that people can't concentrate.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. No. I mean that's probably a better way to phrase it, or just meaning this like a basic assumption that we can't assume that the average prayer is even under the best circumstances is really that intention filled or mindful itself, and that being the case, okay, so in that case, okay, obviously, let's say praying, I guess, would show a lesser degree of respect, but at the same time, if there is this presumption that the average prayer is not really so concentration or mindful to begin with, so then we're more likely to relax about these things. I think it's a similar thing with regard to groom on the wedding night.
Wait. I'm pretty skeptical. I'm pretty cynical myself.
Yeah.
But is it just a straightforward presumption that we're just going to go ahead and say, no one's really thinking about their prayer anyways?
Not necessarily that. It just, the presumption, well, actually, no. So the analogy would, let's say, I was going to mention about, let's say, the groom on his wedding night. So like
right. From the Mishnah
in
Brachot.
the Talmud, it's taken for granted that that a groom won't be able to concentrate on the Shema or on prayer, and so therefore the groom is exempt. And later authorities are say actually like so in the Talmud it's that if a chassan is saying, oh, I want to say Shema, they're sort of like showing off spiritually. Because saying, everything.
Rabban Gamliel there in the Mishnah, he says, I said Kriya Shema my wedding night.
Oh yeah, totally. But
he was the exception. He was the exception.
But otherwise, there's presumption of like, hey, who is this guy? Who is this guy? He really thinks that he's able to. He's showing off that he's able to concentrate. But when we get to later times, we seem to have a different presumption that if a chassan were to say, oh, I am not going to say Shema or the Amidah because I'm not able to concentrate, that's as opposed to, all these other times where my kavanah was so unbelievable, and so therefore on this particular night where I'm not able to concentrate, as opposed to all those other times, that's why I'm not going to say the Shema. So meaning, so it's this sense of this guy is saying that he prays with such great kavanah than all the other days of his life. I mean, so in other words, it's this different set of assumptions of what would be considered showing off or based on this modern context.
Yeah. Maybe I'm not 100% cynical, and I still want to think that people have a sense of being able to be mindful about their words when. Oh
yeah, no, totally. I mean, though, as I said, I would agree that there is something to be said about whether or not the average person is able to concentrate to begin with, but there is this aspect of like showing respect for prayer aside from anything else.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Polsky, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Drew. And I guess to anyone, thank you for watching, and l'chaim.
Absolutely, l'chaim.